just give things just a minute or two. I know we've got about 18 folks signed up, so want to be respectful of everybody's time, but give people a minute or two to join us. Well, I think we can go ahead and get started. I want to thank everybody for joining us this evening. Especially, I realized that this meeting was rescheduled, so I really do appreciate everybody's flexibility. We have been doing our best to accommodate a really busy schedule of meetings with the limited capacity that we've got on the staff side. So I really do appreciate y'all's flexibility. The goal of this meeting is really to hear from you all. We will get things started with a quick presentation, and then we want to spend the majority of the meeting talking about your questions about the proposal, your concerns about the proposal, any suggestions that you may have in terms of how we could be doing things better. We're all ears. This proposal is very much still a work in progress. And engaging with you guys is a big part of that progress. So with that, I'll turn things over to Anya, who's going to run us through a quick presentation, and then we can get started with the conversation.
All right, sounds good. Taz, do I have the full screen up?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. There's always so many issues with doing this. But thank you, everybody. And like Taz said, this is really just a work in progress. So I apologize if you've heard this information before, but we'll try to make it brief so that we have enough time to answer questions and hear your comments. So you probably have seen this go out last week on public input and elsewhere. Basically, we want to just stress that we are here. So last week, we asked council to close the public hearing. We intend to return in the spring and open a new public hearing. And the benefit of this is that it really allows us to engage with all of you. And so we can, we have the opportunity now to have some additional neighborhood meetings, receive feedback, and then looking at our upcoming schedule, we intend to go back to the council tentatively in mid-April and have a work session. And that work session is really an opportunity for us to share with council what we've heard from the community, as well as provide some options for moving forward and let them give us some direction. So you can see on our agenda here, really through March, April, we're really continuing to do those neighborhood meetings, and you can continue to find updates on the meetings, both on the public input page as well as the project web page on the town website. And so if they're not already, we'll make sure to stick those in the chat so that you have them. So the question we keep hearing is, why are we doing this? And so back in September of 2021, the council petitioned members of staff to create a pathway to expedite or allow for the creation of missing middle housing types while we were still waiting on the land use management ordinance rewrite project. And that the LUMO rewrite is something that is occurring, and we anticipate it'll be worked on in the next few years. And then there was also this projected housing needs study, and it found that while our housing supply in the community has grown, it's not meeting our current demands. We're very good at building single family houses and large apartment complex, but we haven't really built anything in between. And that housing study found that we need approximately 500 new units per year just to keep up with our current demands. Of that, I think they projected about 40 units or so were going to be student housing, and then about another 440 units were going to be for working age and senior housing. So then the other thing I would point out is that we recently had SB Friedman do another report for us as part of the Shaping Our Future project. And it also found that, we have a lot of folks in Chapel Hill that live in Chapel Hill and commute outside of the community for work. And we also have a lot of people that work outside the community and commute in. And so just to keep up with the housing prices, back in 2020, you would have needed about $96,200 per year in your household just to afford the median home value. And a lot of the apartment complexes that we see being built around town since 2011 actually require an annual income of about $69,000 a year. And so this kind of dovetails with the complete community strategy that's been ongoing, that also is calling for a diversity of housing types, not just for property owners or homeowners, but also renters. And one of the things that strategy identified was that new units and accessory apartments could help add some gentle density. I also wanted to just quickly remind folks about the different requirements for single family development and multifamily development. And so currently, single family, there are no restrictions on the house size unless your neighborhood conservation district provides some. Accessory apartments are to be no more than 750 square feet or 75% of your house size, whichever is smaller. In some cases, if they're attached, they can be up to 1,000 square feet. You have an impervious surface ratio of 0.5. So this is your the area where like your roof covers, sidewalks, driveways, patios, hard surfaces like that. Typically, there is no stormwater mitigation required for less than 20,000 square feet of land disturbance. And the tree canopy coverage or protection requirements really only kick in when you do land disturbance of 5,000 square feet or more. There's also no parking requirements for single family. And so if we turn and look under the current requirements for multifamily development, and this would be anything that's 2 units or more, I guess. For duplexes, the floor area ratio is 0.4. And for 3 or more units, it's based on the zoning district. Currently, duplexes have an impervious surface ratio of 0.5, I believe, but if it's 3 or more units, it has 0.75 impervious surface. If you are building multifamily development, you do have to provide stormwater control measurements. We also require that you provide 30% tree canopy coverage. The parking rates are typically based on the number of bedrooms per unit, and we do require some screening for your solid waste and recycling bins. So this is what the current text amendment summary is proposing. The first part is really just updating the LUMO. We want to make sure that the setback and height exceptions are reflecting contemporary needs. And so we've been looking at, fences and EV chargers and things like that. We've also been struggling with how to define townhouses. And so because they're not specifically called out in the LUMO today, we want to make sure that there's a definition, development standards, and some subdivision standards. And then one of the other things that we noticed was that most of the accessory apartment requirements are buried in our definitions, and we want to make sure those are pulled into the narrative of the LUMO. And then part 2 is really what you're most interested in, and that's these opportunities to increase missing middle housing. And so even though duplexes and accessory apartments are a form of missing middle housing, we really want to focus on those forms that aren't necessarily outlined specifically in the LUMO. And so when we're talking about missing middle here, we're talking about triplexes, fourplexes, and even cottage courts. The current proposal is to allow these in most zoning districts. We'll talk a little bit in a second here about removing density limitations and what that could look like. And then currently single family home is administratively approved. And so we're proposing to do something similar for triplexes and fourplexes. So when we talk about missing middle housing in this context, planning is really talking about the housing form. And so this is the definition for missing middle. They're calling it a bungalow court, we're calling it a cottage court, but it's basically the same idea of creating this smaller size developments with multifamily. And then gentle densification is really just the process of incrementally increasing density by the construction of these smaller scale apartment buildings. So again, the purpose of this text amendment is really to clean up the LUMO, like those items that I mentioned before, like the setbacks and height. We also want to create opportunities to integrate missing middle housing forms into existing residential neighborhoods. There's interest in increasing housing production by identifying the barriers that exist in the LUMO today that have prevented the development of accessory apartments, duplexes, and other small scale multifamily forms. We want to make sure that we're encouraging compatible infill development, both in established single family neighborhoods as well as the historic districts. And then we want to think about ways that we can strategically and sensitively increase density through incremental development. And so when we talk about eliminating the density maximums, we're really just talking about one column on the table that's in LUMO 3.8, I believe, because there's other ways to define density besides the way that we do it currently. So currently we focus on dwelling units per acre. But we could look instead on focusing on the lot size, the setbacks, and the building dimensions. And so you can see here how you can take the same building form and divide it into multiple units without actually changing the overall mass and scale of the building. This is just the chart showing, I think this is what we presented to council. So basically on the left side here, anything with an underline would be a new use that we would need to define and add to the LUMO. Across the top here are your different residential zoning districts. Where there is an existing P, that means it's a permitted use. And where the P is underlined means that we're proposing to allow it to be a permitted use in those areas. And then you'll notice that multifamily is CZ, which is a conditional zoning process that requires council approval. So I'm going to briefly go through this. Again, we want to make sure that we're including some townhouse development standards, including the minimum lot size, how many units you can have per lot, making sure that there's some separation between townhouse rows, and then there is no minimum unit size on these. So you can kind of see here where we're going with those. And then we heard from Durham that there's actually still a lot of demand for single family homes or detached single family homes on lots. And so one of the things that they've been using is this small house on a small lot option, where you could build a single family or even a duplex that is on a smaller lot than what's currently allowed by the zoning. And because it's smaller, it comes with smaller setbacks, but it also means that there's some restrictions placed on the lot to ensure that like the maximum footprint doesn't go beyond 1,000 square feet, that it has a smaller floor area, that you're only doing 1 to 2 units, and you're purposely keeping it smaller to match that smaller lot. And then we're also proposing triplexes and fourplexes. And so you can see through most of this, we're saying that they need to follow the underlying zoning for the lot size, the width, the setbacks, and even the height. And then there is an impervious surface ratio. Currently, multifamily is required to be at 0.75. We're proposing 0.5. We're also proposing a tree canopy coverage of 20%. The parking would stay the same, that it needs to follow the parking is based on the number of bedrooms per unit. The floor area ratio would also follow what the zoning prescribes, and then there would be a minimum and maximum unit size. And then we also wanted to make sure that these new units were compatible and fit into the R zoning districts. And so one of the things that we've been investigating is this neighborhood compatibility. And so under the current proposal, it would be that if the subdivision or the neighborhood was platted at least 20 years ago, and at least 50% of the lots contain single family dwellings, you would have to design the new units to fit in with the neighborhood. And so it considered things like setback, height, your roof forms, whether it's pitched or hip, the width of the building as seen from the street, how the building's oriented towards the street, where entrances are located, thinking about windows and doors, building materials. And then we did require that the parking be either on the side or the rear of the building. And so you can kind of see this is a loose sketch where one shows a single family house. You could maybe have an accessory apartment above the garage. And then in these other forms, you're creating smaller multifamily developments. And then this last one is the cottage courts. And so again, we said that the minimum lot size has to be between 10,000 to 24,000 square feet. You could have 3 to 12 dwelling units in these cottages that are arranged around a central courtyard or landscaped area. Again, the impervious surface would be less than what's required under multifamily today with in 0.5. Each one of these could have 1 to 2, depending on your zone, vehicle spaces per dwelling unit. And then in order to keep these small, there's also some building dimensions being required as far as the widths and the depths and the heights. And so with that, I just want to emphasize again that this is our schedule and it's available on the public input webpage. And so, we are really here in this yellow bucket where we're still holding neighborhood meetings and we'll continue to do so throughout the spring. So with that, let me stop sharing. And looks like Robin, you are our first hand to go up. So I'm going to move you in.
Yeah, so all of us have probably spent the better part of the last 3 years in Zoom meetings. And I just have a gentle suggestion. It was really disorienting for all of us to be not like I can't see my neighbors and I was automatically muted. So you might want to start out by telling people that's the format. I don't know if this is the first meeting after your break from neighborhood meetings. But like I said, for me, I've spent the last 3 years in Zoom meetings and this format was a little disorienting. So like I said,
that's helpful. Thank you for telling us that.
Yeah, I felt it feels a little bit like you're being lectured to, and there's no way to communicate back, and it's just very disorienting. So thank you. I'll save my question for later because I'm still trying to recover.
Okay, sorry about that. Margaret, I'm going to move you in. Margaret, are you there?
Margaret,
oh, go ahead, Taz.
I was just going to mention, Margaret, you're still muted if you were hoping to share a question.
Okay, well, we'll go back to Margaret. There was a question about whether we received your questions and will we address those. So yes, we certainly can read off the questions and give responses if that's helpful. I know in a lot of these meetings, it seems like it's been better to be more interactive, but it's up to all of you.
I know, one of the first questions that was shared by y'all's group was, what are the objectives, right, of the housing choice amendment? Are they, I believe the question asked, is it specifically about creating more affordable housing units? Is it about creating more walkable communities? What are the objectives, right? And I think that the name to a certain extent explains what the objective is, right? The goal, the primary goal of this is to create more housing choices in Chapel Hill. Chapel Hill has historically done two things very well in terms of development, right? We have a lot of single family homes, detached single family homes, like the neighborhoods that y'all live in. And then we have a lot of much more dense multifamily development, like what y'all are seeing along a lot of our major thoroughfares through town. But we don't have a lot in between, right? And that's where missing middle comes in. That's where this idea of gentle density comes in, that it's an opportunity to create more housing. And we do that in part by not just reinforcing those two extreme ends of the spectrum that the town already has, but we do it by providing more choice and more options for the type of housing that people can live in town.
Okay, we'll just maybe bounce back and forth between the PDF and the questions. So I see Rob and Nancy have their hand up, so let me move them in.
Hi, staff. How are you?
Good,
Listen,
thanks. How are you tonight?
we're in Asheville, so it's really pretty nice up here. Quick question for you, and I know you've got and hopefully you will address some of the concerns and the questions. And I think one of the biggest questions that we had was the existing zoning regulations that we have in place. And the way the proposal reads that any existing neighborhoods that have a homeowners or an HOA in place, which excludes certain types of housing within the neighborhood. And I think ours, I think we found out expired in 2020. So one of the things that we thought about was going back and recanvassing the neighborhood and start the process of the HOA again, which again would lock out this proposal from our neighborhood from being included in that. One of the things that we don't want to seem like we are guilty of is we don't want this not in my backyard kind of thing, because I think there could be good uses for having, small cluster home type situations. What our biggest concern is, and it's our neighborhood is it's a closed neighborhood. In other words, there's no through street. It's just a loop, where we are.
Mhm.
So what we're concerned about is having all these students which come down there. Mostly they get lost. They leave their garbage. And so the housing that we've seen where there's been more than single family is when single families have moved out and rented their homes, they rented to 4 and 6 students end up living there. Okay, which, it's against code, quote unquote, but those are the kinds of units we're trying to avoid coming into our neighborhood because we are so close to the Greenway. You can walk to campus from our neighborhood. And I think the closer in neighborhoods that you're considering changing from the R1 status, those are the ones that are going to be most subject to student housing. And housing, which is really not more affordable. Let's face it, students, yes, they could live in an apartment for the most part and they would be fine and get a 5-bedroom or 4-bedroom apartment and have 2 or 3 bathrooms in it, and they would be just as happy, except if they were able to move it close to town or close to campus and the prices were similar, they would probably choose to be close to campus. They can walk, bike, all the total community concepts that we are looking to create in Chapel Hill would meet their needs. It would meet the town needs, except it wouldn't meet our neighborhood's needs, because all of a sudden we have a lot of student housing in our neighborhood, which, we've had both good and bad student housing in our neighbors. Currently we've got a great batch of students. They keep the noise levels down. They let us know if they're going to have a party. The thing that's missing is they're not really part of our neighborhood. They're just in and out. They drive their cars, their friends come to visit, but they're good in the sense that, they're not leaving too much garbage, they're not making too much noise. And I think most of us can get to sleep unless it's summertime when the windows are open. But that's really the biggest concern that we have, is we don't want to turn into off-campus housing. Okay, because let's face it, we have a lot of older homes in our neighborhood. If people sell their homes, what's to keep a developer from doing a tear down, placing 4 units in there, 6 units in there, whatever it happens to be, because we've got some good lot sizes, and then turning that into, a student housing complex, because that's where they're going to get their return on a capital investment, as opposed to when we can keep it, a lower density provides, I think, much more of a neighborhood feel, because these are neighbors. They're not, most students are in and out. So that's the number one concern, I think, of our neighborhood, is turning into another, I won't say Davy Circle, but Davy Circle has a lot of that type of housing in it, although slowly but surely it's gotten more expensive and people have bought those multi-family type units and have turned them back into single family units. But again, it's the choice of the owner of the house or the person that we sell to. That's my biggest concern. I don't know, anybody else may want to speak up, but you can mute me and answer back and see if you have any questions, from the rest of the neighbors. But I don't mind having, a small cluster homes in the neighborhood if they would fit in and they, according to your guidelines, they would meet the criteria of the existing neighborhood as far as the look, feel, and, so go ahead.
Well, before we respond, I just want to acknowledge that Susan echoed your concerns that she has fears that it won't be gentle density for neighbors like ours because there's concerns about increased traffic, noise, and litter because of the student rental. So I just wanted to make sure, Susan, that we acknowledged your comment.
Yeah, and Rob, we really appreciate those concerns. It's something that we have absolutely heard from other neighborhoods near campus. And I think going back to this idea that the proposal right now is very much a work in progress, and we do want to make sure that we are addressing the concerns that we're hearing. There are obviously, or maybe it's not obvious, but there are not legal means by which we can prevent students or any other group of people from living in a particular home. But that doesn't mean that we can't do things that could kind of move the needle a little bit away from students. There are, one of the things we have heard from a lot of neighborhoods surrounding campus is that there's a lot of concern, especially surrounding the idea of triplexes and fourplexes. So one of the things we're considering is rethinking exactly where those triplexes and fourplexes would be allowed, or if they are allowed in certain zones, putting in place regulations that might slow the rate of development, or slow, at least limit the number of new triplexes or fourplexes that could come into a particular neighborhood. Those guidelines or guardrails can take a lot of different forms, but it is something that we're looking into, I think, very much in response to the very valid concerns that we've heard about what that type of development could do for neighborhoods, particularly around campus.
Well, the one thing that I think you sort of mentioned, it's the neighborhoods that are in close proximity to the campus. Those are going to be most affected. And I don't know if there's a way to zone appropriately for the number of bedrooms per unit, so that you don't have 3 bedrooms or 4 bedrooms and 1 kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
In a single family house, that's fine. But if you have 4 kitchens and 4 units, 4 bedrooms in each of those, you've got 16 potential students, or in the case of our neighborhood, perhaps 24 potential students, because they double up and triple up, and they share the cost of a bedroom being so high. You'll have, where there are 4 bedrooms, you'll have 6 people figuring out a way to stay there. So I think that's if there's a way to zone according to location as far as proximity to, as you said, maybe make it more difficult for those kinds of units to be built closer to campus, as opposed to, further out, where then you're really competing with the multi-unit apartments.
Yep, no, absolutely. And like I said, it's certainly something that we're taking a hard look at. Yeah, so thank you for those comments, Rob.
Yeah, I'll shut up now.
So I'm going to move Rob out and we'll move Rachel in. And then after Rachel speaks, I'm going to move Susan in as well.
Right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. All right. So I'm going to follow up with what Rob was talking about. I live 2 blocks from him on Roosevelt Drive, which is a neighborhood that begins at Franklin Street, goes down up Maryland Lane, down further and around Hillcrest Circle, down toward Howell, and down farther all the way to Plant. I'm saying this not for your benefit, because you know that, but for the others. And the reason it's a single neighborhood is because of the way the neighbors interact. There are maybe 3 separate areas, we could call them, but most people know each other, at least at the part from just below Howell up toward Franklin Street. So my concern and the concern of a lot of people in this area is that this is a mixed neighborhood. That means to say that there are people of all ages who live here, including a number of students down below in the smaller houses that have been built. But in the past couple of years, 2 small houses have been taken down and 2 large single family homes have been put up. Now, the problem is that none of us have sidewalks, and the children range in age from college to, I'm including them for a good reason, college to high school, all the way down to below kindergarten. They ride bikes. They're out in the street at night after school. We already have trouble with traffic zooming in on Roosevelt off Franklin Street. We've been trying very hard to figure out how to slow it down, but people just sort of come in off, and it becomes dangerous. And my house, especially being the second one, has my grandson next door. So he's 10 and rides his bike, as do all the others in the neighborhood. And we are concerned that the increase of traffic, the increase of people who may or may not be a solid part of the neighborhood, as Rob was talking about, neighbors, in other words, instead of just people coming back and forth, and changes the character of what we can do, but it also changes to a great extent the safety of the neighborhood.
Yeah, thanks for those comments, Rachel. They're very well noted. And
I have, excuse me a second, I'm sorry, I have one more. I
Yeah.
made a note and I forgot to say it. Because there's school children around, the school buses come in and in and out. And I think there needs to be, along with this whole proposal of increasing density in older Chapel Hill neighborhoods, better traffic patterns, and better use of the, I'm going to call it interim spaces between houses, so that if someone buys a lot, let's say, and puts up a duplex or even a fourplex station, that there is a way to control the ins and outs of the neighborhood so that it makes it safer. That's it. Thank you.
yes, ma'am. Thank you very much for your comments on that, Rachel.
Hey, so this is Susan. Am I next? Okay, great. And yeah, I agree absolutely with what Rob and Rachel have said. And there's, been a lot of talk about, in our community, everyone is invested in our community except those students that live in the single family homes. So that is a big thing. It's our sense of community. And then there's some other issues that I wanted to bring up. I've seen your plan for parking spaces for these multiplexes. And what we've seen, and I think Rob touched on it, is that yes, you're only allowed 4 unrelated people to live in a unit, but that doesn't happen with our students. There's always more than 4. So for example, if you have a 4-plex and you only allow 4 parking places, there will likely be 6 or 8 people living in that 4-plex. And so that means that then those cars come out and park in the streets. We already have street parking with some of our students because, there's more than 4 people. But that's another issue, is that you're not accounting for the fact that students will be doubling up, sometimes sharing a bedroom, having a bunk bed, or having 2 twin beds. They'll do that to save money, and that's understandable. So just to let you know what our experiences have been. Another issue that I've kind of really quite understood is how the town council can expect this process to be equitable across all neighborhoods when you have some neighborhoods that already have HOAs or restrictive covenants in place. So this won't affect them, but the neighborhoods that don't have those in place will be affected. So there's that equitable, the equity, it just isn't there. I just don't understand that. And then the other thing my other issue would be, in general, when a developer if they want to come in and tear down a house to build a multiplex, it's most likely that the house they're going to tear down was the most affordable house in the neighborhood. So you're losing something that a single family could have afforded and could have lived in, but yet a developer is going to come in and take that and they're going to reap the benefits, the financial benefits. So, there's just a lot of unanswered questions around all of this.
Yeah, absolutely, Susan. And thank you for those comments. I think, there's a couple of things I can just touch on. To your last point, we understand absolutely that there is a potential, right, for smaller, potentially more affordable homes to be torn down and replaced with some sort of missing middle housing. I think one of the development trends that we are seeing in Chapel Hill in a lot of neighborhoods is that smaller, more affordable homes are already being torn down and being replaced with larger single family homes, right? That that are not resulting in a net gain in the number of families or households that could live on the same property. And so one of the things that we're trying to do with this is at least give more options for those that, where there are already development pressures. We're just trying to create an opportunity that rather than a single family home being torn down and replaced with a kind of a McMansion sort of thing, that there's at least the opportunity for it to be replaced with something that could house even more people, more households, more families. To the equity issue, I think is something that we've definitely grappled with. Because of the way development has kind of worked in Chapel Hill, there are a lot of neighborhoods that have restrictive covenants, right? We know to a certain extent that those restrictive covenants themselves are inequitable mechanisms, right, that result in inequitable outcomes. And so I think the question there is, do we allow inequitable policies in part of town to be a justification for not trying to come up with more equitable policies and solutions in other parts of town? And it's not something that we have an easy answer to, but it is something that we're grappling with. So we recognize that equity is really at the heart of a lot of what we're trying to do here and a lot of what we're trying to undo.
And there's one more thing. I know that we do have someone here who's joined, who lives in up in Davie Circle, and maybe she might be willing to speak to what it's like there living with the multiplexes in that neighborhood and the students, and what some of the problems and concerns are that they have compared to what we have in our neighborhood, where it's mostly single family homes. So I'll just say that and encourage her to speak up. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Susan.
Elizabeth is next, and I'm going to try to move you all in at the rate that you raised your hand. So if we've already gotten to you and you don't mind, lower your hand and we'll come back around for a second round of questions.
Okay, you can.
So Elizabeth, you're next, and then Naomi, I'm going to move you in.
Okay, thanks. Hi. So one of the things I wanted to touch on is I think a lot of the neighborhoods that don't have the HOA covenants, all the neighborhoods close to town, ours being one of them, some of the ones further up the hill have a pretty special place in what makes Chapel Hill a unique and inviting place to live. Some of them are very old historic neighborhoods that I think all of us would be really sad to see be degraded. Ours is a little bit different in that I think it's a really important extension of the green spaces that we have in Chapel Hill, and the number of people that you see riding bikes, jogging, walking their dogs up and down our streets. And, they make loops between our roads and and the trails that run next to our neighborhood. And any increase in traffic is going to severely affect the use of our neighborhood. And it's really lovely. I mean, we don't have a ton of traffic because, as Rob mentioned, we are a dead end neighborhood. There's no reason to come down here in your car unless you live down here or you're, a DoorDash driver driving way too fast down our hill. But we get tons and tons of walking and biking and jogging traffic. We get students, the cross country team trains on our hill, and an increase in traffic in our neighborhood is really going to adversely affect that. The other thing, and I will also add to that, I have 3 children. We have a number of neighbors, down here at the bottom of the hill who have children, and it is already really sort of frightening how fast cars sometimes come down our hill. The people we bought our house from were right down at the bottom of the hill, and the people we bought our house from, turned over their slow children at play signs to us because they're like, you got to put these out because cars come so fast down this hill, and it's already pretty frightening. And that's with pretty limited traffic. The next thing that I wanted to touch on is, with all of these huge condo complexes that have gone in, of these huge high rises with apartments, I think most of us would agree that they are pretty unattractive and have not been particularly, I'm sure that when their zoning and their development was being approved by our town, there was a lot of talk about adding affordable housing. My husband and I own 2 restaurants. We employ a lot of service industry people. They can't afford to live in those apartments, and they will tell you that. So I get very frustrated at the idea that more of the same will happen in just another package. And I don't really see anything in any of the plans to prevent that happening, because obviously single family homeowners are not going to come in and build a multiplex. It's going to be developers. It's purely going to be developers with, capital investment interests. And they will build cheaply, and they will either sell or rent as cost effectively as possible. And I just don't see the problem actually being solved any better than it was solved with these giant condo complexes. And I also think, it's probably a touchy thing to touch on, but the aesthetic appeal of our town is real. People want to live here because it's pleasant, and we're already ruining it around the edges with these giant condo complexes. And so just saying these huge apartments created a problem that we didn't foresee adequately when we approved them. So let's slap another problem on top of that to try to solve that problem that we created by not quite thinking it through appropriately. We moved here 6 years ago. My husband's family has been in the area for a really long time, and listening to them say oh my God, what has happened to Chapel Hill already is a little bit heartbreaking. And having watched the development over the last 6 years has been kind of alarming. And I'm all for diversity of community. One of the reasons we chose to live in this neighborhood is that, it is not as cookie cutter, and it is more diverse than some of the neighborhoods that have those HOA covenants, et cetera. We really love that and would welcome more diversity in our community, but not at the expense of quality of life, because I don't think that does anyone any good, and not the people to whom it affords housing or the people who are already here. And then I appreciate that you are willing to admit that there is this problem of the equity between the neighborhoods that do have the HOA covenants and the neighborhoods like ours that don't. But it seems to me that knowing that problem is out there would be a reason to sort of slow this process down until you can find a solution for it, rather than just say, yep, we're aware of it, we don't know how to solve it, we know it needs solving. Because if you approve this, developers come in and start building, they're going to come in and start building whether you guys are aware of the problem of equity or not. So that would seem to me a reason to put the brakes on, figure out how to solve that, and then move forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Next is Naomi. I'm gonna start moving folks in. I do see that there's a lot of questions in the Q&A, and We have about 15 minutes left. I want to make sure we're respectful of everybody's time. So I'm going to try to give priority to those that have their hand raised. And then I will put, if we haven't already, we do have a frequently asked questions page on the town website, and we're constantly updating it. And so let me put that link in the chat for you as well, so that you do have it in case we run out of time here. So with that, I'd say hit it, Naomi.
Okay, and I'll try to be quick, but I agree with a lot of what has already been presented to you all. I do want to point out that in the presentation you gave, I forgot what that is, with the drawings, which I've looked at very carefully in the past week. You know, those are like ideal conditions where you have exactly a rectangular lot. And so you have a house that fits perfectly on it, and you can easily split it into duplex or triplex or quadruplex. Our lots aren't like that. Our lots are irregularly shaped. I'm not talking about just this neighborhood. I'm talking about neighborhoods throughout Chapel Hill. And the reason that matters is because anyone who buys a house here, if they are a developer, investor person, they will realize that because of the way the house sits on the lot, it's not worth it to expand or to add an apartment to the house, that it is easier to tear it down and then replace it with a triplex or a quadruplex. So that was the first thing I wanted to mention. The second thing is that I agree this is putting an unfair burden on the modest homes, the modest neighborhoods, because of course, as I think Rob mentioned, the profit margin is greater. Developers and investors are going to snap up the lower cost homes first. And what they replace it with is not going to be affordable to the very people we're trying to include and keep in our community. So I think that, you know, there has been talk among some of the council members about this as a way to right some wrongs in housing in Chapel Hill. And to me, it's just propagating. It's making the difference between the haves and the have-nots that much greater. When a developer comes in and is putting in student housing, these are not houses that can easily be converted to single family homes later, because a lot of the newer developments geared towards students are like one for every bedroom, there's a bathroom. And for most lower income people, they can't afford a 4-bathroom home. They might need a 4-bedroom home, but they can't afford 4 bathrooms. Then the last thing that I wanted to say is that one of my big problems about how the town is, or the council is approaching this, is that they're only talking in terms of increasing the density, but not talking about the real sources of the problems and alternatives to that. For example, what's it called? The inclusionary zoning ordinance. Right now, a developer who builds 5 or more units are required to make 15% of the units for affordable housing. Well, why isn't that increased to at least 30% or 35%? For example, the apartments that are, and I know that's only good for the houses or condos, it's sellable units, not rentals. But the apartments that have gone up on 15501 Fordham Boulevard in the Blue Hill district, that's displaced many more low income housing or low rentals than 15%. So why aren't we looking at alternative ways to approach this problem? And that is increase the requirements on developers. Why aren't we talking to the university about putting a freeze on their admissions? Right now, I've looked up the numbers, and the campus only provides 8,500 units to student housing, or to students, 8,500, or a little bit more than that. That's it. when you look, the total student population is almost 32,000. So that means over 22,000 students are living off campus. Granted, it's between Chapel Hill and Carrboro and a little bit scattered beyond that. But why aren't we approaching UNC about this? Why? You know, there are so many other ways we can approach this problem as opposed to shifting everything on Chapel Hill residents. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Naomi.
Margaret, you're next, and I'm going to move in Robin.
Okay, so I lived in this neighborhood at 207, and my house would be a prime target for a developer to tear down and replace with a triplex or a quadruplex. And our neighborhood had no requirements, no homeowners association that would say what the aesthetic qualities of that triplex or quadruplex should be. The town is not going to be able to monitor all this. That is very clear. And the neighborhood of Glen Hill, Glendale is so important in Chapel Hill. It is a prime neighborhood in terms of modernist homes from the 1950s and 60s. So I also share a lot of concern for East Franklin Street and what this proposal could do to East Franklin. But what it could do to Glen Hill and Glendale is probably more pressing because the price point of our properties on Glen Hill and Glendale is more attractive to developers. I cannot imagine a triplex on my former home site. I cannot imagine any way in which it could fit in with the neighborhood. And I don't know who's going to monitor that. I can't believe the town can do so, because when I lived there, I saw that the town was not able to control the fact that up the hill from me, more people, more students were living in a home than was allowed. The town cannot monitor this. There are so many aspects of this proposal that are, oh, I want to say they're in goodwill, but they're not enforceable. And so I think that one of the things we need to look at is, first of all, I am aware on your website, you've listed a number of towns that have embarked on similar sorts of gentle density proposals. I have asked your planners to give us data on the outcomes of those proposals. And I received an answer saying, we don't have that data yet. How can we be moving forward with a proposal and suggesting we have models in other cities around the town, around the country, and we don't have any data on what the outcome has been? So many questions people are raising about, is this really meeting our desire for more affordable housing for middle income people? Many of us share that desire, but to move forward without any data that this proposal will accomplish that seems to me so wrong. End of message.
Thank you, Margaret. All right, Robin, you're next, and I'm going to move in Elena.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to thank all my neighbors in the Glendale, Glen Hill neighborhood. I agree with all of their comments, and not to continue to focus in on students, but when you show the drawings and when you talk about LUMO and use kind of your professional jargon, it overlooks the personal aspect of all of this. And I have a personal story about the students that I would like you to hear. So we have lived in our house for 12 years, and next door is a single story, I think it's 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom ranch house that for most of our time in our house was occupied by a family, a renter family, that I thought actually owned it because they took care of it like it was theirs. And then came the 4 college freshman girls who lived there. And my husband and I suffered through late night noise, parking on our front yard, trash in the street, underage drinking and driving, keg parties. And we tolerated it all and didn't say a word, because one afternoon I went into the kitchen and there were a couple of male college freshmen relieving themselves in public against the side of that house. And if they're going to behave that way in a neighborhood full of adults in broad daylight at an underage keg party, what would they do to me and my family if we ratted them out to the cops? And so my biggest concern, and it kind of echoes what Margaret just said, she was my next door neighbor, or my cross the street neighbor, go Margaret, go. What my biggest fear is that a house like Margaret's, or a house like the one I just described next door, does get replaced with a 4-plex or whatever plex you want to call it. And we have to tolerate students that don't respect the neighborhood. And when we talk about equity, where is my equity being respected? That's an unintended consequence, because frankly, I don't want to spend my retirement years policing the conduct of college kids. So we would actually consider leaving the neighborhood. And we have spent our entire adult lives working hard, being financially and otherwise disciplined to live in a neighborhood we utterly adore. And the idea that we would have to leave it because we've gone down this path too quickly and we don't think about unintended consequences is kind of heartbreaking. And so I echo everything everybody else says, but ask you to consider that there are real personal stories and unintended consequences that the diagrams and all of the professional jargon just don't simply reflect.
No, thank you very much for that. And like I said, we're hearing your concerns, and we do want to make sure that we're refining this proposal to address them. So we really appreciate the personal stories. We recognize there's gaps in our understanding as well, and so we appreciate you sharing that.
So Elena, you're up next,
Thank
and then we're
you.
gonna let in Lori. And I just wanted to point out that we will put our email addresses in the chat for all of you. I know there's a question about whether or not we could have a follow-up or second meeting to hear from all of you. I would say just we will continue to be probably looking at some public open houses and some other venues. And so just out of fairness for all the neighborhood meetings, we've been trying to keep it to an hour, but we can continue to keep you posted about additional opportunities to share your thoughts with us.
Thanks. This is Alana. I just want to thank all of my neighbors, most of whom I consider friends, for their really thoughtful comments. Margaret, it's so great to hear your voice. I think our neighborhood and I share with you this vision of a town that is walkable, bikeable, where we have a good sense of community, where we know our neighbors, and we have a high degree of trust. That's why we moved into Chapel Hill. That's why we moved to this neighborhood. We actually knocked on doors around different neighborhoods in Chapel Hill to decide where to live. And that's why we ended up where we are, because of the neighbors that we met when I made my husband go knock on doors. And, we are not what I consider to be the wealthiest of families. We are I work at the university. I also have young kids, one of whom was almost hit by a car on Roosevelt and Hillcrest. So that really resonated with what one of the previous speakers said. But I do think that in this goal of reaching a community and building a community that stays walkable, that stays bikeable, that stays safe, I reiterate what Elizabeth said, that we need to sort of hit the brakes, have a better plan, and have more foresight, because actually a lot of the towns that eased up on a lot of their zoning and district requirements suffered really adverse consequences and had to go back and change the restrictions, and then had to have bigger battles with some of the developers and landowners. So I do think it makes sense to reapproach this with a different tiered strategy, of requiring developers to have a greater percent of their units meet a line, maybe to provide tax incentives to help people achieve that affordable housing before we start easing up on things that makes our neighborhood susceptible to adverse consequences without thinking those through. Right across the street from us is a single unit home that was one of the more affordable houses in the neighborhood. It went on the market and was bought up by an out-of-state LLC. We have multiple friends who approached that buyer who's out of state to try to purchase the home back to have a family to live here, even above asking price. And none of those were successful bids. It was worth it for that developer to make that profit, and it's now an Airbnb. So I think these are the things that we see in this neighborhood. It's panned out time and time again. So I would like to, and I'm happy to help like think through planning. I have a lot of urban planning adjacent expertise. My father is an urban planner. He's worked with many cities all over the world. So I've had some conversations with him and thinking this through and slowing it down, because there are a lot of examples around the country, not of cities, but of college towns that are really important to model. Thanks for what you're doing. Good luck.
Yeah, we appreciate it. And I'll put the call out for help. You know, we are looking for examples. We have talked to some college towns. We're always happy to hear about more. So Alana, if you've got some information that you'd like to share, you've got our emails, and
I'm sorry.
We would
You
absolutely
asked for it.
yeah, no, absolutely. We would absolutely invite it, and would certainly benefit from anything you can share.
Okay, Lori, it's after 6, so you are our last
I'll
speaker for tonight.
I'll make it short and not too sweet. Thank you. And I'm the one that Susan pointed her finger to as I live on Davy Circle. And I love Rob's early comment saying, you know, if we're not careful, we're going to turn into a Davy Circle. And so I want to just speak to what that really means. I've lived on Davy Circle since 1984. And since I have been here, the big changes that have happened have been 4 or 5. So in the last 10 years, really, 4 or 5 smaller duplexes. There were 2 duplexes a little around the circle, maybe in the, I think they'd be in the 40s or 50s on Davy Circle, were torn down. They were 2 simple brick ranch duplexes that are now, when they were being built, the plan said they were going to be 4 bedrooms, but the advertisements for leasing them said 6 bedrooms. So there's inconsistency with what people are saying they're doing and what they're actually doing, as everybody knows. We've already heard this. We spoke to the town about it years and years ago, and they said they absolutely cannot do anything about how many people live there because they'd have to catch them at it, right? They have to come knock on the door and catch all 7 people there. So that, you know, that rule, that regulation that we have is absolutely untenable. It's useless, to be honest. So 2 of those happened, and then 3 other smaller houses that were, one was 2 bedrooms just down on Hill Street, which faces, you know, fronts Davy Circle. Actually, one more too. It's between Davy Circle and Glendale. Was a 2-bedroom house. It is now a 4-bedroom house, 4 baths. Same thing, same problem. Parking is horrendous. The traffic is unbelievable. People speed around the circle like they are going to the ER. When I scowl at them, they flip me the finger and honk their horns and tell me to get out of the road. And there's a house right now that backs up to Hill Street, fronts onto Glendale. That is, I called the town at least a year ago. It's still zoned single family, but the woman who owns it is probably turning it into a 4-plex. And she had requested, it's still single family, but she requested more parking space. So, you know, it doesn't take a very smart person to go, okay, this is not going to be single family here. She's been working on it probably 3 years, maybe 4. It's an eyesore, complete eyesore, at least on our side of the street. right? Doesn't look too bad on the front. She keeps the Glendale side pretty cleaned up. Two other houses were 2 or 3 bedroom houses, which are now 4 and 5 bedroom houses right on Davy Circle. I think one is 64 Davy Circle. That's one of them. Sometimes, as everybody said, students can be fine. Sometimes the students can pee on the side of the wall, like I think it was Alana, no, before Alana said. The trash rarely gets put out. It's scattered on the street. I'm just really echoing what everybody else has already said. Traffic, 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 traffic. We're a closed circle like Glendale and Glen Hill. Traffic, traffic. Can I say it a few more times? To get it clear, traffic. You know, I think our speed limit's 20 and probably people speed around at 30, and it's dangerous. It's dangerous. It's dangerous. They're children, they're old people like me, they're dogs, they're cats, they're bicyclists. That's all I have to say. Oh no, one other thing I want to ask. I missed in the presentation, I listened, you're talking about middle housing, but I never heard you say middle income housing. Am I accurate there? That has nothing to do with money. Like, you don't care if I have just the money doesn't count. It has nothing to do with middle income. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's right, Lori.
Oh, this is really even stupider than I thought. Okay, there you go. Okay. So let me just make sure I'm understanding, Taz. So you're saying I could build a 4-plex here, still charge $1,000 a bedroom, no requirement for any middle income. It's just the size and the density. That's all this is about. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly what this is about. We know that, like I said, it's about making sure that there are housing choices for the community.
For the students. Sorry.
It's about making sure that there are housing choices for the community. We have absolutely heard from you all and from others, again, near campus, that there are some really significant concerns about what that could mean for your neighborhoods. And this is still a work in progress, and we're going to work to address these concerns as best as we can within the confines of what we're trying to accomplish on a broader scale. But thank you all for showing up. This sort of engagement is absolutely critical to making this a better proposal. So we do thank you. You have our emails. We're happy to take any information, suggestions, what have you, to help make this a better proposal. So thank you from me. I don't know if there's any other parting words from some of the other folks on the call.
No, I would just say that we will continue to be scheduling different meetings, opportunities with council and so forth. And so keep an eye on our project website, and we also have your email addresses from registering for this meeting. And so we'll do our best to make sure you all get a notification of when we do those things. So thank you all again for making time tonight, and have a good evening.